Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Topher Drives, where today you join me for a bit of a reality check for what a morning is like in Michigan in December. It's 26 degrees, it's gray, it's miserable, but at least I have this 2025 Toyota Crown Signia to accompany me on my morning commute. I've got to go out to Vintique Motors in Livonia, Michigan, and do some bring a trailer photography. And I figured, of course, as always, I would take you all along with me on my morning commute and show you a little bit of what it's like to live with this new CUV kind of disguising itself as a wagon from Toyota. Admittedly, this is my first time ever seeing one of these in person. Well, a few days ago was when it got dropped off. I have been living with this for a few days. I've put about 130 miles on it. And yes, it is running this morning because it's freezing and I want to make sure it's warm when I get in. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this Crown Signia. For those of you that are understandably unfamiliar with this thing, so Toyota introduced the Crown Sedan last year, or two model years ago at this point, I suppose 2023, and we were all a bit confused. I think it replaced the Avalon, but it also kind of replaced it was set to replace the Venza, and then they came out with this, the Crown Signia, which is kind of the wagon version, and then in Japan they have other versions of the Crown, but the Crown is a very sort of iconic name from Toyota. It was a sedan, and I think still is, or was very recently, a sedan in Japan. So having the Crown name over here is definitely new for us. They've had it over in Japan for like 30 years at this point, but this is the first time we have seen it. And I think this Crown Signia, oh, it's windy and terrible. I think this Crown Signia might be the one to have because it makes a bit more sense. The Crown Sedan is a little bit awkward because it's still lifted, it still has cladding, and it's a little bit confused on what it's trying to be, where I think this car has its identity figured out a little bit better. So let's walk you around this thing, and then we're going to jump in it and commute it about half an hour out to Livonia. And, well, a lot of people are going to be using this car to commute, so we'll see what it's like. So there are only two trim levels of the Crown Signia. This is the top trim, the Limited, and it starts at 47 grand. The lower trim, the XLE, starts at $43,000. So there isn't really a super like stripper base model of this car, and Toyota kind of wants it to be luxurious right off the bat. Under the hood, we have a 2.5 liter naturally aspirated four-cylinder. This is a hybrid, it's all-wheel drive, and it has a CVT, combined power output 240 horsepower. And I would love to tell you combined torque, but Toyota hasn't released that figure, so I don't entirely know. If I had to guess, it's somewhere in the low twos, as we have 199 pound-feet from the front and 80 pound-feet from the rear. Those don't come together to make an even 279 or whatever that would be, but it would be somewhere probably low to mid twos for torque. It weighs 4,200 pounds, and it's about the size of a Subaru Outback. I just drove one of those, and I was saying we don't really have anything else in the segment to compete with that. So it's cool to see some of these more wagon-shaped SUVs coming out. Okay, my ears are freezing, it's miserable. Let's quickly walk you around this, and then we're gonna jump in it. Let's open the back. Ooh, it is cold. Man, oh man, I am not ready for winter. In the back, we have a pretty good amount of room, and Toyota claims some sort of like 60-something cubic feet of room with these seats folded down. We don't have a ton of under trunk storage here because, of course, this is a hybrid and there's lots of tech underneath this, but a pretty good height loading surface. I'm 5'11" and it goes right below my hip, so easy to put things in and out of this Crown Signia. That's always good. Don't want to do extra lifting when loading things into your SUV. Let's check out this back seat. This car's finished in finish line red with a saddle brown interior. I love kind of the texture and dimension of this leather, and we'll talk more about that once we're up front. But backseat room is quite nice. Sat behind myself here at 5'11". I have room here in every dimension. The roofline on this car is not as high as some of its SUV counterparts, but I do still have plenty of room, even with this camera on my face. Legroom is good. We've got two seat back pockets, two USB-C ports. We have center mounted vents, very easy to point at yourself. And we have heated seats that have their buttons mounted here on the door panels, which I do like. You don't have to reach down there for your heated seats. Center armrest with some cup holders. And there's kind of just enough back here. They haven't overdone it with this back seat interior. I'll give you a quick glance up here at the front. Pretty typical Toyota switchgear and everything like that. All right, let's brave the cold one more time. We're gonna pop the hood, and I wanna talk to you about what makes this a limited over the basic trim. So the main points here are bigger wheels, you get a 11-speaker JBL sound system, and you get a pano roof. Now this car is only $4,000 more than the base model. Oh man. And you don't get hood struts. That's a little bit disappointing. This car as spec today, $53,000 with the options, with destination, everything like that. Would maybe like to see hood struts on this car. Anyways, we do actually have an engine cover, which is nice to see. Toyota badge on there. As the engine comes to life, you can hear that. Quite a bit of room actually in this engine bay. If you were to be working on this car yourself someday, I think that would be pretty easy if you don't mess with any of the hybrid tech. This has the little clip to hold the prop rod on the hood, just like my 2003 Lexus IS300. We're running some Bridgestone Turanza all-season tires today, and I really actually do like this wheel design. 235/45 R21. These are some seriously large wheels. 45 section sidewall should be enough to soak up the bumps for us today, but we will have to see. Okay, let's end the outdoor portion and jump in here. Love these door panels, and when this got dropped off, honestly, the first thing I noticed was this big, solid piece of leather wrapped trim here on the door. Reminded me of a Lexus, the new RX, the new NX, things like that have similar interior adornments. And honestly, I gotta say, I'm jumping the gun a little bit here. This is the closest Toyota product I've ever driven to a Lexus. It seems like with these higher end cars, they get closer and closer and closer to competing with their own luxury brand. Of course, they have to draw the line somewhere. So this has a couple of things that you wouldn't get on a Lexus. For one, and Charlie will be happy that I'm mentioning this, but we have no power adjust steering column on this $53,000 SUV/wagon. So that's something that you would have to upgrade to a Lexus to see. And also just some of the trimmings aren't quite as nice. Some of the plastic that they use in here, you'd never see in a Lexus. But overall, don't get me wrong, this is a really, really nice place to be. We have a beautiful leather wrapped steering wheel. I love the design language in here. The dimension of the dashboard is really, really attractive. I love the way the brown kind of cuts through the middle there. Lots of good colors in here. There's some gold trim on our shifter, on our steering wheel, on our dashboard. Lots of just little subtle touches that make this a very, very nice place to be. Pretty good storage solutions in this car as well. My favorite one is the wireless charger for your phone. It just kind of sinks down into the center console. Your phone is out of the way, but you can still see that it is charging. I do really appreciate that. Center console is pretty deep as well. You can see my hat is down there right now, and you still have plenty of room to put other stuff. 2 cup holders and a little bonus cubby right here with some USB-C ports. I think a lot of manufacturers are struggling with kind of packaging in these SUVs that are this size, but this one does a good job. And just quickly checking over our Monroney here. Total retail price, $53,249 with a starting price of $47,990. Our options on this include the advanced technology pack, which gives you the 360 camera, traffic jam assist, all of that stuff. Usually the only option that Toyota will even sell you these days is just extra tech. And then of course you can pick your interior and exterior colors. This color is a $425 option. And then we have a couple of dealer accessories. We have a dash cam in here. We have illuminated door sills, carpeted floor mats, and all of that stuff. 38 combined MPG, 39 city, 37 highway. This week, over the last 123 miles, I've been averaging 31.2, but keep in mind, it's very cold out. It's been doing a lot of idling. It's been idling probably for 20 minutes right here as I wrap things up. So just something to keep in mind. But okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get this thing out on the road and we'll talk to you about what it's like to drive. Heated and ventilated seats in this car, and we also have a heated steering wheel, which has an auto setting, which I appreciate because I've been driving cars lately where the steering wheels get way too hot. This will regulate that and turn it off when it senses it's done its job. Infotainment is what we've been seeing in every Toyota model lately. Wireless CarPlay and Android Auto. I've got mine hooked up right now. And I mentioned earlier this 11-speaker JBL sound system. I think it's the best JBL I've ever heard in any Toyota product. I'm making that claim right now, and we'll back that up once we're on the highway later, and we'll give you a sound system test. But let's go ahead and get out on the road. Use our kind of Prius-style shifter here to put ourselves into reverse. You can hear that hybrid backup noise. I think for $50,000, this should feel pretty upscale. And for the most part, it does. There are a couple of things about this car that are a little bit confusing, and we'll go over those as we drive. But the one thing I want to start with is the steering. I usually talk about steering weight as I'm pulling out of this parking lot because maneuverability is a very important thing. And the steering in this car has a little bit more heft than I expected. It's not a heavy steering feel. I feel like I hear something rattling in that door. Maybe not. Something is rattling. Haven't heard that yet. There's a little bit more heft to the steering than I would have expected. And don't get me wrong, it's not like you're, lugging around a Mustang Dark Horse or something like that. But I expected kind of like pinky light steering in a car that they're marketing as luxury. Quite a bit of noise as well from that 2.5 liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder. These Toyota hybrids though are always like this. You always get a lot of drone upon acceleration, and I think Toyota could maybe work on adding a little bit more sound deadening under the hood, behind the dashboard, whatever needs to happen. I just got out of the Prius, spent all last week in that. And it's very much the same way. It's a little bit louder, of course, than the Crown Signia, but there's something very non-luxurious about a CVT and a screaming 4-cylinder. I don't mesh luxury with that soundtrack, so that's just another thing to consider with this package. And we mentioned a bit of heft to that steering when you're in a parking lot, but what I will say is the steering delivers a very, very nice communicative weight when you're actually driving at normal speeds, like I am right now, 55 miles an hour. Lovely old Volkswagen camper there, very cool to see. This is where I appreciate the steering when I'm actually on the road, because I actually have a pretty good sense of what the front end of this car is doing. I cannot thank Toyota enough for putting a physical climate control panel in this. That's one perk you have over a new Lexus, because of course the Lexuses have those in the infotainment. Though I believe they are in a fixed portion, I still prefer this physical setup in the Toyota. All right, let's take a fast corner with this, and then we'll jump on the highway and we'll commute it. And pulled enough G's there to set the dash cam off. There's a little bit of body roll, but I think this car is damped very appropriately. I wouldn't necessarily change anything about the way that it rides. I think for what it is, it's just about perfect. Handles just fine. Like I said earlier, steering, a little bit of weight to it, but is confidence inspiring around a corner like that. I'm going to pull out of here, and we're actually going to use sport mode. We've got a few different drive modes on this car: Eco, Normal, Sport, and Custom. But I want to roll into it and give you guys an idea for straight line speed here. And there's 60 miles an hour. Now the regular Toyota Crown sedan is available with Toyota's Hybrid Max powertrain, which is what we see also in the Tacoma. We'll see it in the new 4Runner. Vehicles like that, the 2.4 liter turbo, which makes over 300 horsepower, over 400 pound-feet of torque. And I was under the impression that that was the powertrain that came in this. I was not an expert on this car up until a few days ago, and I had no idea. So when I got in this for the first time, I was a little bit let down because I kind of thought this whole idea of like a wagon-looking car with over 400 pound-feet of torque from Toyota would be excellent. So I was slightly let down when I found out it was just a 2.5 NA. I think maybe in the future we may see a hybrid max variant of the Crown Signia, but for the time being, this is your only powertrain choice, and that is a little bit disappointing. But also considering the fact that the hybrid max would probably push this thing over the $60,000 threshold, it may not make sense for Toyota to do that when the Lexus RX exists. But here's the most important part of driving the Crown Signia. What's it like to sit on the highway? What's it like to commute? Well, let's start with seating position, which I'm actually a pretty big fan of in this, and I think it makes sense for the platform. I've got the seat all the way down, as I usually do, and I can see just about halfway over this hood, or bonnet, if you're watching from overseas. And elbow comfiness is great as well. We've got really soft surfaces on our center console and on our driver's door panel. Ergonomics are great. You can rest both of your elbows down here, put your hands on the steering wheel, on these two lower spokes here. We also have adaptive cruise control. We have lane tracing, all of the driver aids that you would need. Accessible via one physical button here on the steering wheel. You just have to tap this one on the upper right-hand side, and it takes care of the rest for you. Everything is toggled on. You can adjust your adaptive cruise distance here as well. And I've read some articles on this car with people complaining that it's loud, and I disagree. I mean, loud compared to like a Porsche Cayenne or a BMW X5, sure. But I think for 50 grand, with this being a Toyota, it's a pretty appropriate level of road and wind noise here in the Crown Signia. And you guys can observe that for yourselves here. I'll be quiet for a second. It's also a seriously windy day outside, so there's going to be a little bit of added wind noise. So I'm pretty pleased with this car, noise level wise, besides hearing that 4-cylinder scream upon acceleration. But just floating down the highway, I've got no problem whatsoever with NVH. Adaptive Cruise seems minimally nervous. I don't really feel like I'm holding up traffic with this system like I would with some of the Honda systems. So you feel pretty confident using this. Just realized how high I had that set. That was not on purpose. It does mask its speed pretty decently well. It's a good sign of a luxury vehicle. Everything in here is nicely in reach. You guys saw me adjust the climate earlier. The infotainment is nicely in reach if you were to be adjusting music or something like that. Obviously plenty of controls on the steering wheel. You've got a volume adjuster here as well as a button to skip tracks, adjust radio stations, all of that stuff. It's just ergonomically, everything in here really does make sense. The only issue I've run into is I've bumped my head into this upper section of the A pillar, and I think just with the way this car is designed, the A to B pillar section is a little bit more narrow than some cars, and the windshield kind of slopes a little bit more to have kind of that slick back design, making this look more like a wagon with a lower roof line. One thing on this I'm not a huge fan of, and this goes for all Toyotas at this point, honestly, with a digital gauge cluster, is the digital gauge cluster. I think there is just way too much going on these, and I first noticed this in the GR Corolla, where I was expecting just like a very simple, nice, satisfying, sporty gauge cluster design, and instead I'm overwhelmed by like 50 different metrics on this thing. Like, there's so much information on here. It's a little bit overwhelming. Now you can adjust the way this looks and give yourself somehow even more information. On this slide, you can see your hybrid system, the way that's working over on the right. This one just puts a map in the middle, or you can hold down the OK button and you can switch some of the things. It's just, there's so much going on that I'm a little bit overwhelmed by it personally. Coming up to our one Cloverleaf, I think we're going to be behind a Subaru Crosstrek for this. Nope, we're going to be behind a couple other cars, but we'll try and give them a little distance. We'll give Peepaw a little bit of grace there in the GMT 800 Silverado. No quick cloverleaf for us today, but that's all right. Don't know that I'd want to be going faster than 37 in that thing, to be honest. I have been using sport mode for my merging this week just because it is kind of hilariously slow, this thing. I know 240 horsepower doesn't sound all that bad, but when you pair it with an over 2-ton curb weight and just a very unenthusiastic and unmotivated CVT, it's not a very exuberant experience. You really have to push this thing for it to accelerate. See, they're having to rev itself out almost to 6,000 RPM. Bump ourselves back down into normal. You know what? Let's actually go into eco mode here. I've honestly found that eco is my favorite mode to drive this car in, just because it numbs the throttle response enough to where you don't feel like you're constantly blipping the throttle on this CVT. So eco calms it down. I didn't talk about brake pedal feel earlier, but while we're on the topic of throttle, brake pedal feel is great. I think Toyota has some of the most natural feeling brake pedals on their hybrids. And that, I'm sure, has a lot to do with the fact that they've just been doing this for so long. They know exactly how to tune a hybrid brake pedal. So I'm satisfied with this one very much. All right, well, before we get into any more thoughts and before we wrap this video up, let's test this 11-speaker JBL and give you an idea for how high-end this sound system really is. So that should give you a pretty decent idea of what the sound system is like. I am impressed with the clarity of this system, and I'm also impressed with the power, because you never really get kind of that silky, like warm bass punch with a JBL system. They're usually a little bit hollow and grainy. And this one's fantastic. I mean, this is genuinely the best JBL I've ever heard in any Toyota product. So kudos to Toyota for investing a little bit more into these JBL systems. It really does go a long way in making the car feel that much more upscale. Certainly does here with the Crown Signia. One funny thing is this volume knob is like a Volkswagen volume knob, where the little graphic for the power button is fixed on there. Luckily, you have this physical volume clicker on the steering wheel, so you can always have your volume knob in the upright position. Volkswagen owners will know what I'm on about there. Camera rearview mirror in this car. You don't really need it. Greenhouse in here is okay, and you're blocked a little bit, honestly, by these headrests for the back seat. So the camera mirror is nice to have. This is not standard. You do have to option this on with that technology
Police
package.
reported ahead.
That's nice to have as well. But visibility out of this thing is okay. I think there's a little bit of weirdness with just the spacing of the A to B pillar. The B pillar does kind of affect your over-the-shoulder check. At least where I'm sitting in this car, I do feel that it is a bit more of a blind spot. Hybrid transitions are nice in this, of course. Something that I would never doubt from a Toyota. You don't even really notice that it's happening because the 2.5 liter is really only loud over like 3,500 RPM. When you're on the highway, you don't notice anything happening. So switching back and forth is no problem. As far as comparing it to a Lexus, I think the smoothness of most of the inputs, as well as just everything you touch in here, does feel very Lexus-esque. And Toyota's got to be careful with this because it's going to, especially for a car like this, when the RX exists, NX, TX, all of the Lexus SUVs, it's going to make them less desirable. For people that don't care about the badge, this is almost as nice. So it's It's a little bit tough when you can save a couple grand buying a really, really nice Toyota product. I suppose there are other things to argue, such as the dealership experience, some of the other bespoke options that you can't have on a nicer Toyota. But still, it's worth mentioning how close this feels to a Lexus product, and the closest that I have felt so far. Another thing I really like about this car is it means that you don't have to buy a Subaru Outback if you want a wagon-shaped SUV. There wasn't really anything else. I mean, there's the Volvos, like the V60 Cross Country and things like that. Those are more kind of true wagons. But this provides a nice alternative to the Subaru Outback, especially if they end up doing like a, what would they call it? What's Toyota's off-road variant? TRD off-road? No, that's not right. Trail Hunter? Is that what they're calling? I don't know. If they did like a Crown Signia Trail Hunter, that would be sick. With the Hybrid Max, a snorkel. I'm just dreaming at this point. Everybody would buy that. I mean, it'd be like $70,000, but it'd be a good enthusiast car. We touched a little bit on it earlier, but I kind of want to end this with just complimenting the ride quality on the Crown Signia, with the way that it's not floaty, but it's still so soft and cozy, yet confidence inspiring going down the highway. You don't feel like you're having to make constant adjustments to this thing. It still feels quite planted. So I don't really think they could have dialed the ride in any better, and the lower trim car with smaller wheels, I'm sure, is even nicer to drive. So there's that. So, okay, well, as we exit here, why don't we wrap up our thoughts on the 2025 Toyota Crown Signia Limited. This is a car that I know in the vast sea of SUVs, it gets lost, it gets overlooked, but I gotta say, I appreciate the sizing, the packaging, and the little bit of uniqueness here with the Crown Signia in the vast market of SUVs. It's kind of a cooler choice, and it'll make you stand out a little bit more. I think there's a little bit of that kind of polarizing styling on the front, looking like the Ferrari Pro Song. I know people have made that joke with this and some of the other new Toyota models. But the biggest thing here is just how luxurious this car feels, apart from the screaming four-cylinder, of course. So I wish they could give us a different powertrain, but otherwise, everything in here just works so well. Everything makes sense. It's all in reach. Easy to use. You could throw your grandma in this car and she'd probably know how to drive it with no problem. It's a good package. I have minimal complaints, and there's just a couple small things they could fix with this, and I think it would be such an excellent daily driver. And I already think it's a pretty good choice in the segment here. It is just tough with how many SUVs Toyota has. I mean, they have so many at this point. But I guess pick your flavor. You've got a lot of choices. Okay, guys, well, as we pull into Vintique Motors here, let's go ahead, wrap it up, give you one last look at this 2025 Crown Signia. And I'd love to hear in the comments what you guys think about this. Did you even know this car existed? I think we'll be seeing a lot more of it into 2025, but it was kind of a soft launch okay, I promise I know how to park. It was a little bit of a soft launch. The Topher went to the first drive of this car, but I think it was kind of overshadowed by another product, if I remember correctly. So it kind of launched in the background while Toyota was launching a lot of other important products. So hopefully we can shed some light on this thing, and hopefully people appreciate it a little bit for what it is. So let's jump out, take a look at it. Our MPG from that trip this morning, 26.4. So not too great, but that does count quite a bit of idling that we did at the beginning. I think it's a really handsome design. I think they did a great job with this. So, all right, well, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about this in the comments. But that'll do it for us today, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.